So yeah, thank you very much for having me today. It's really exciting for me to come and talk to you at this point in the development of Kudos, which is, as Ian intimated, a company that's very much a startup. We've only really been going for about a year, less than that really, and we're still welcoming every opportunity to talk to anybody about what we do. And what I'm going to talk to you about is the web service that we're in the process of developing, which is designed to help researchers and their institutions and their publishers and their funders to increase the visibility and therefore the usage and hopefully therefore the impact of their work. So I shall quickly start with just what is the problem that we think we're solving. You can all holler if you disagree that any of these are problems. The first one is the problem of information overload. Some of the stats that we found when we started reviewing the literature in this space include this staggering one that there are already over 50 million published research articles, and that number is doubling every 20 years. And that's not even including necessarily the 35 billion words that Tim's putting online, or all the other kind of social media stuff that's growing around the formal literature. So even if you're just talking about research articles, there's already too much of that. And of course, time to read it is not doubling. So that's the first big challenge, is how to read more strategically and focus what time you have on the content that's going to be most relevant and most helpful to your own research. One of the other challenges that was in the sort of ether when we were talking about Kudos at the beginning was the fact that formal communications in journals and so on are often written in very formal language. We did talk about that as technical language when we first started using this slide, and then I realised that people were misconstruing that really. I don't think you have to be in a technical or scientific subject area to use dense language. Some of the worst examples Ian and I were just laughing about this morning come from history or philosophy, and there's difficult to understand language in every corner of academia. And that means that even to understand and evaluate the abstract, for example, of an article, you've got to have a pretty good understanding of the topic to be able to do that efficiently. And it takes time and expertise before you've even got into starting to read the full text. And lots of mechanisms exist that try to address that. So when you submit your work for publication, you'll often be asked for a kind of plain English summary of what is this basically about. Or your funder will ask you for a kind of plain English statement of the impact of the work. And institutions are doing a lot of work with press offices and so on to create videos and things like that that will help to explain the research that they're undertaking. But a lot of that doesn't end up in the public domain at all in some cases, or if it does, it's kind of spread all across the web. Some of it's on your department work pages, some of it's sitting in the funders' web environments, some of it is kind of on YouTube or whatever. So it's not always actually visible alongside the full text of the journal or the ebook. So it's not doing as much as it could do to help people quickly evaluate the work. And another area that I've talked about a lot with colleagues in the past, and a lot of the academic researchers who've been helping us as we've developed Kudos, is the whole area around social media. And actually we've heard a lot this morning that would suggest that my statement here is not true, which is that I've often found that a lot of academics have really good social networks and they are on Twitter and they're using Facebook or whatever, but they're not often using that to share their work. I think there definitely are people who are using those channels, and I think I really liked Tim's point about the people who are passionate, who do such a great job of talking about their work because they basically can't help but to talk about their work, and they'll do that in any channel that's open to them. But I think there are still a lot of people who, while they do use social media, somehow feel that it's not appropriate, it's not the right place to talk about their work. And certainly we did a survey when we were starting out with Kudos. We had 4,000 researchers fill in the survey, and lots of them said that their institutions frowned on them using social media to talk about their work, as if somehow that devalued the work in some way. So I think the networks do exist, but they're kind of being underutilised, whereas we know that those word-of-mouth relationships and those networks are often the most valuable signposts you can get to the material that's going to be of interest to you, which is sort of the point that both of you have made, really, that, you know, getting insight from Twitter on a daily basis is a fabulous way of knowing what's hot in your area. So there's more that can be done to use networks. And one of the outcomes that we felt, this is a made-up graph, that's why there's nothing useful on the axes, but we felt there was this kind of likely to be a classic long-tail curve in relation to the usage of academic works online, and that the things that were at the head of that curve and that had achieved a certain level of popularity were just going to grow and grow in the amount that they were read, and therefore the amount that they were cited. And then the things down in the long tail were just going to be languishing there, even though they could represent some equally valuable or important research. And of course, while all of those things are the case, we're also seeing all sorts of developments, and this is where I'm going to speak the language of publishing a little bit, I guess. But we talk a lot in publishing about article level metrics being the next big thing, and you guys have both touched on that this morning. And the fact that we're trying to get away from evaluating research at the journal level, which is sort of meaningless, and trying to do that more and more at the level of the actual work, which hopefully should be more meaningful. And lots of publishers have started to introduce article level metrics that are actually visible to anybody reading the article, or certainly often made available to the author at least. And alongside that is the development of alternative metrics, or altmetrics, which look at other ways of measuring the value of academic research. So looking beyond citations, which have been for far too long the kind of currency of academia, other things that may or may not be meaningful in terms of the value of the work. And there's a lot of research still underway to try and understand what is the value of a tweet, what is the value of the social media conversations that are happening, what is the value of abstracts being read, or of usage outside of citations, and so on. And of course there are ongoing changes in research evaluation, which you will all know a lot more about than I will, so I'm not going to try and explain those to you. But in terms of what was feeding the development of Kudos, we just became very aware that there was this real shift from things happening at these kind of group levels and enterprise levels, whether that be the journal, and things happening more and more at the individual level of the work and the individual research themselves being evaluated. And that was a real culture shift. And it just seemed like there were a lot of changes happening. So the changes in research evaluation, changes in the way that works are being measured, changes in terms of trying to help people read more intelligently and provide them with greater resources and information to do that. There's a lot of talk again in publishing about discovery, which is probably not a word that you think about a great deal in the real world, I don't know, but we talk about discovery and discoverability quite endlessly, trying to enable that technically, but also the kind of the cultural meanings of that and the different ways in which people are finding content and selecting it. And for publishers, it's obviously a big deal to be thinking about author services and trying to compete for the right to publish the works that researchers are producing, which if you've been through rejections from journals, you probably don't think of it as from that perspective, but again it's a very competitive area, trying to get the best research, and publishers are all the time trying to do more to build on that relationship that they have with researchers in their role as authors, and to provide the best services and to do more to help people make their work get widely read. So we had all these conversations going on in the background kind of in the last couple of years, and we boiled it down to there being too much information and not enough time, there being this kind of valuable supporting assets, horrible word, sorry, lost in these kind of silos, and valuable networks not being used as well as they could be to help people explain and share their work and add context to it. And it just came down to us was what could be done to try and address these problems and to match more of the right people to the right content. And the advantage for authors then being that your work would have a wider reach and therefore hopefully achieve greater impact. And then that would obviously have knock-on effects for the people that authors are working with or for, the funders, the institutions and the publishers. So that was kind of the challenge that we set ourselves. And we felt that key to resolving that challenge would be making better use of the passion and the expertise and the networks, the connections of the researchers who created the work. There's nobody better to explain their work, to put it in context, to be able to communicate it to different audiences than the research. And institutions will try and do that to an extent, and funders will try and do that, and publishers will be trying to do that. But we could all do it better if we were involving the researchers more effectively. But the big block to that is that as researchers you don't have many hours in the day for helping all these other people to make your work more available and easier for people to understand. So we knew that we had to come up with a system that would be easy to use, that would try and automate things where possible, that would be readily scalable so that whatever effort you were putting into it would be less and less the more work you did with the system. A really key point for us was that it mustn't belong to any one organisation, so it couldn't be a single publisher's system and that you'd have to get to grips with systems across lots of different publishers. It was pretty clear that that's already a frustration in terms of, for example, submitting journal manuscripts, and so it felt really important that we came up with something universal. And that most of all, that whatever effect using such a system was having, you'd be able to see that for yourself, and so it would be reporting back to you all the time about the effect of what you're doing, so that it would encourage you to do more of it if it was proving effective. So I'm going to stop talking in abstract now and actually introduce you to the service, which we've called Kudos. And the idea is that it gives authors guidance and tools for explaining and sharing work for wider audiences. And it's not rocket science. A lot of it is helping people to find and use the tools that people like James and Tim are already using very effectively, because our research showed there's a lot of people who don't know where to start and don't know how to go about talking about their work in this kind of less formal but still very public environment. And to address that kind of reward aspect, we will pull in article level metrics, so pulling in data about the usage of your articles, pulling in the alt metrics data that shows you about how much the discussion is raging in the social sphere, and placing that alongside the data we've captured about what you've done in our system, so that you can see that when you did something on day X it had effect Y. And there's three basic steps really. The first one is that we encourage you to write plain English descriptions of your work, so adding a short title. There's some very interesting research that shows that articles with short titles and simple titles get more citations than articles with long titles that have complicated characters in them. We ask you to add a lay summary, the kind of thing that you might have already got sitting around because you've had to submit it alongside the journal or something like that, and we ask you to submit an impact statement. So that's the kind of basically what does this article say and basically why is this work important. And then we invite people to put links into other resources that exist. So that might be the blog postings that you've written, that might be a talk that you've given at a conference, that might be the slides or the videos from that talk, it might be a set of images that go with the book or the article, but of which there were more than actually got published, all sorts of things. It's been very interesting to watch what's been added there. Lots of people have added things like links to ongoing work in progress, links to full details about the method or data that you can download, scripts that you can run yourselves to repeat the research, that kind of thing. So we're very unprescriptive about what gets added there, and it's been fascinating to see the extent to which that function is being used. And then step 3, we encourage people to then get out and share it. And at the moment we have enabled really simple integration with Facebook and Twitter. Our next steps are to broaden that out to lots of other social media channels. But we also encourage people to share by email, because that is probably the most comfortable format for a lot of people. And we provide suggested text that you can use, and then critically we provide trackable links. Again, not rocket science, just the sort of thing that you would use already in daily life, bit.ly links and so on. But we're tracking those so that we can report back through our interface on the effect of your sharing, and you can immediately see when you come back how many people clicked through on those links and what impact that then had on usage of your work. So where we started was this massive literature review last year. We looked at something like 50, 60 publications of various sorts, ranging from kind of formal peer-reviewed articles to some of the resources that you guys have mentioned this morning, blog postings and so on. And they were on topics like the role of social media in research communication, on topics like the correlation between activity in social media and citations, which is a really thorny area that is very hard to analyse, and it's such early days that there's not a lot of evidence yet, but it's very interesting to see the evidence that is emerging. As I said, we looked at things like the role of short titles in increasing citations, and one of the things that's coming out quite strongly, both from our own work and that came out of this literature review, is the simpler the language, then the more chance that you broaden the audience, so people like the media can pick it up, even if it hasn't been through the conduit of the kind of the press office who are helping or hindering that process. So the addition of simple language can do a lot to kind of broaden the audience. And surprisingly, a broader audience and broad media coverage does correlate to increased citations. I know people are quite sceptical about that, but of course other researchers in your field are just as likely to read the lay media as they are to read the literature itself, so they will also pick up on stuff from that channel. And we've also talked a lot and read a lot about the role of multimedia, and there's some really interesting evidence about, for example, video abstracts, and if you create a short video that describes your work, much as the abstract is doing, that can increase usage. In one of the cases we looked at, an article that had a video abstract was getting 10 times more usage than the other articles in the same issue of the journal. It wasn't the most scientific of studies, but I think it's very interesting that you can already start to see that some of these things are actually increasing usage, but incrementally here and there, and there's no movement as yet that really recognises this and is making use of that. So that's what we're trying to do. Incidentally, we're hoping to publish the results of the literature review, and if anybody would like to suggest places that they would expect that to be a good journal, a suitable journal to publish that kind of thing, then I'd love to hear from you. As I said, we did a survey. We went out to, I think in total we invited about 40,000 researchers to fill this in, so we were quite pleased when 4,000 actually did so. And we asked some quite general questions, are you satisfied with the current levels of usage and impact of your work? And 84% said no, they weren't really satisfied at the moment and they thought more could be done. I thought it was fascinating when we asked people whether their institution provided any support for increasing the impact of their work, and 50% said no, which I think is perhaps true. In some cases there really is no support. I think it's also the case that it's not always clear to people where that support is and how to access it. And certainly a lot of the individual researchers that I followed up with on this question kind of acknowledged that maybe no didn't quite mean no here. What they really meant was, if there is, I don't know about it, so it might as well be no. Although there was a don't know option, the people didn't seem to feel empowered to click. And I also found it interesting because we asked, who do you feel should be responsible for increasing the visibility and the usage and the impact of your work? And we asked, for example, do you think the publisher should do more here? Should it be the funder? Should it be your institution? Should it be you? Should it be your co-authors? And there was a really strong majority who felt that personally they were the only person to take responsibility for that, which wasn't exactly a surprise to us, but it was welcome news. It reinforced what we thought people felt. And encouraged us to go ahead and develop this toolkit that would enable people to take personal responsibility for this. So then we went ahead and developed a pilot site. We had some funding from 3 publishers, you can see on the left there, who very generously supported this process. And we took in articles from their recent publications and then randomly split them so that there was a control group that we didn't do anything with, and then a test group that we then contacted the authors and told them about the service and invited them to start using it. And I'll come back to the importance of that control and test group. And as an author, this is basically what you do. You come into the service, you either sign on with your Facebook or Twitter ID, or you register just with your email address and a password. And once you have claimed your article, you start to see this view metrics option. That's not available to everybody. You have to have claimed your article to see that. And so then you can come in and see what the current metrics, what the current situation is like in terms of full text downloads and abstract views of your article. That's on the publisher's website. And then we also show you the alt metrics, so how many tweets have there been, how many Facebook shares, how many people have bookmarked it onto Mendeley, that kind of thing. And a lot of people log in and see that, which is a sad truth of the communications of research. And that we hope then encourages them to start using the Kudos tools. So we provide immediately a reminder to go in and start using our service in the hope that they can make some changes to this. So when you go back into the article profile page, you get to start adding some new data to the article. So obviously all the existing metadata that has been formally published will still exist. That's not what you're editing here. What you're actually doing is adding new material. So you're adding a short title, and we give a bit of an explanation of why we think that's worth doing, the fact that it can help get work noticed more easily and it can increase the number of citations. We give a bit of guidance on how you should write that, what questions you should ask yourself to help you make a decision about how to do that. And as you've said, there's other places that will give you guidance on somebody said that, maybe that was Ian this morning, about how to write article titles. And we'll ask you for a lay summary that will, again, we give you a bit of guidance on what we mean by that and a bit of guidance on how to write it. So this is an example of how an article entered our system with its formal abstracts, quite long, quite densely written. We asked the author to put in their lay summary and their impact statement, and they were able to condense it down to something much easier to scan and much more plain English in terms of just being able to interpret what this article is about and why it's important. And then we get to the point where we invite you to add those other resources that help to give context to the article and to surface all the other information that you might have created around it, where I think that was a really good point that Tim made, I think, about there's information that just doesn't feel like it really fits in the formal communication, but it's still valuable and it's still going to help people to get to grips with the field or the topic. So you've got all that information in other formats and you can provide links to them here so that this then begins to be a sort of hub for everything that is related to that particular bit of research in that particular publication. And then we ask people to share their articles, and as I said, we give them some suggested text. And we don't actually send that email out because we thought people would be uncomfortable with uploading all their email contacts into this new and unproven system. So we suggest you send that out via your own email client and then just mark it as sent here. And here's an example of one of our users in the pilot phase. She's actually an interesting example because she's not a complete social media guru. She's only really been using social media for about a year and set herself up on Twitter and has been starting to build up her community there. So she came in and she added her article, claimed her article and added some data to it and then tweeted about it. And that tweet then comes back into our system where you've got her nice lay summary alongside the formal abstract. Again, nice and short, a little bit longer if you want more detail. And then if you're really taken by it, you can immediately link off to read the article on the publisher site. And that, within 24 hours of her tweeting that, had generated just shy of 150 clicks on the link that was in her tweet. So this was a really interesting example. It's not the case that she'd got a huge pre-existing network and she would have generated this traffic anyway. Just by encouraging her to do this, she generated a good level of additional traffic. And if I'd pointed out when we looked at that example of full text downloads and abstract usage, mostly people are seeing kind of 2 to 5 downloads a day of an article. So generating 150 clicks overnight to the article is quite a good increase that hopefully will have correlated to a good level of additional usage for her. And hopefully then that in time will lead to additional citations for this work. And where I said, for example, that you mark the email as sent in the system, and that's what that little tiny little A means there. That means you did some action in Kudos, so that when you come back in and look at your metrics, you can see the impact that's had. And what's interesting about this user, Maria, with a very long, unpronounceable surname, is that Maria came in and claimed her article at 6 minutes past 12. And by 9 minutes past 12, she'd added her metadata and shared it on social media. So it only took her 3 minutes to come in and use the system, and for that little bit of effort, she got 60 clicks through to her article. So these were all very encouraging for us, as you can imagine. It's still really early days for our service, but we're seeing that for minimal effort in terms of time, people are managing to generate a lot of interest in their work, and we hope to be able to scale that up and make it something that that is generating that level of additional interest for anybody who wants to use the service. So how did we get on with that pilot? Well, apart from those specific examples, we set ourselves a target of 1,000 registrations for 3 months, and we got that overnight, which caused a lot of falling off chairs and kind of reviewing of data logs and, you know, is this really true? Are we sure we can believe this? But we did, we had to. And by the end of the pilot, we had over 5,000 people using the system, so we were very excited about that. Again, it just demonstrated to us that people do want to be able to do this kind of thing, and there, as far as we know, isn't anything else that's helping them at the moment. And when we then went back to look at our test and control groups, we found that the articles that had been claimed and edited and shared using Kudos were getting a 19% higher level of daily downloads than the articles that were just sitting in the control group for which this service hadn't been used, which again is a very exciting outcome for us, and that particularly because this was a really basic kind of prototype. We haven't done half the things that we would like to do with this service. We just put the simplest mechanisms together and had a go and got people using them, and we were already able to generate that kind of level of difference. So there's real potential here, I think, for doing some simple things to increase the readership of work. So what do we want to do next? We want to... 2 minutes, lovely, I'm approaching the end. We want to work with many more people. We want to get many more researchers using the system. We've got about 20 publishers signed up now, as opposed to the 3 that we worked with last year. But what we're also enabling is any researcher to come in and use the system, even if their research is not published by one of those 20 publishers. So when we launch our next phase of the site in April this year, any of you can come in and register, set yourself up and start using this system to help explain and share your work. And we're adding a lot more functionality, and we're going to start doing more with that data. Well, one thing we think is really important is to get it out there so that it isn't just sitting in yet another silo on our site, but it's being indexed by Google and it's in PubMed or other kind of relevant search engines and indexes. So we're going to try and make our data as widely available as possible. We want to get a broader target audience. We want to be able to get to see whether there is real potential for using Kudos as a way of bridging the gap for the public who are being given more and more access is being enabled for people to look at full text, thanks to new government policies and so on. But it's still a big challenge for people to actually make sense of that material. So can Kudos be the kind of service that helps to bridge that gap for the public, and can we therefore really broaden the audience for research? We'll be working throughout the year, so a much longer test period that will enable us to do some more rigorous analysis, and we've got we're getting on board an academic research group to help us set up the data that we need to capture and make sure that we do some more scientific analysis at the end of that period. And one of the exciting things about this year is that the content that we've loaded already will start to get into that window of being cited, and so we'll start to be able to see whether using our system is helping to improve the level of citation. These are the publishing partners that we're working with. Not a lot to say about, apart from there's quite a lot of them, which is very exciting for us. And there's some big and quite prestigious ones there, which is exciting and also quite scary in some respects. But we're really excited by the extent to which publishers are embracing this. And by embracing, I mean paying for. So that's good. But as I said, there's no limits for researchers. So even though those are the only publishers that are supporting it at the moment, anyone can register and come in and use the site. The only difference that you'll see is that you won't see that usage data if the publisher isn't participating, because they need to provide that. But you will see the altmetric data, and you will be able to use all of our tools. And over time, we hope to be able to get usage data in for everything. And these are the final questions, really, that we're still asking ourselves at this time. Part of our job for this year is to keep talking to more groups like this and to more people in the academic and research community to try and help us understand what's meaningful to you, what would be useful for you in a service like this, how does it fit with other things that you need to do and are being asked to do, what is your experience of social media. There are so many different perspectives on that. How well do you think the kind of service that we're providing is going to help you do some of the things that you need to do? So hopefully we might be able to explore some of those questions during our discussion period. And I can put that slide back up if necessary. But in the meantime, thank you for allowing me to come and talk to you. And do keep in touch with us if that's whet your appetite and you'd like to have a look at the service when it goes into its next phase in April. If you follow us, Twitter's our most active area, but any of those places will enable you to know when we're going live.
Thanks very much.